Good afternoon. The first speaker in this session is Deb Nicholson, and she's going to tell us about FOSS Governance, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We look forward to listening to you.
All right, great. Thanks to everyone who made it back from lunch. I am going to talk about FOSS Governance, as noted. Who am I, in case you didn't know, or whoops, have I done something to the thing? I think I did. All right, I fixed it. If I look a little stiff, it's so we can keep the sound going. I'll try not to do too much hand talking. I work at the Software Freedom Conservancy. I'm a longtime free software policy nerd. Before that, I was a community organizer, so I care a lot about how communities get their things done and how they make decisions, how they move forward, how they make plans and reach their goals. These are just like some of the projects that we work with, some of the things we help them with are governance, some are licensing, some of them need trademark help, some of them need financial stuff. At the end of the day, a lot of that stuff ends up touching on governance anyway. Governance is just kind of a fancy catch-all word that means how we make decisions and how we decide to get things done. It typically, like for today's purposes, is not going to help you with like a land war in Asia, or if you've got like an armed rebellion in your community, then this might not be quite the right talk for you. We're talking about software communities where people's lives are largely not in danger when they, come to meetings and stuff. And we're also talking largely about small and medium-sized projects. So if you have a large project where you have like 17 middle managers to help you figure out how to get things done, this won't be strategies for overcoming 17 middle managers. My focus is especially on projects that have a mix of folks that are volunteers, maybe a few that are paid, either in a contract way or at a company that cares about the project. So let's start with the good stuff. Right? So good might be like a project that maybe it sparks joy or feels good or is enjoyable to partake in. These are projects, you see them and you run into different people from those projects and you're like, oh yeah, that project seems like they really have it together. Seems like everyone's happy to be there. So good stuff. So what does that look like in nuts and bolts? Like how do you get those things done? So first, good projects state their goals. Like they know why they're there. They have a specific thing that they want to get done. So they're like, when people jump into stuff, they know that it's going to be the right thing. They're not just all over the place. And this is like everyone in the project knows, not just like the 3 secret cabal members know what the project is doing. Everyone knows. Same with the methods. So for software projects, many of them have they pick a license, they pick a programming language, they have a way that they like to take bugs, all of those different things, but everyone kind of agrees on it, and there's not a constant white space tab faction happening at your high level conversations. So picking a license is really important. I'm sure in this room, this is, sometimes I talk to folks that are a little bit more so open core, I can kind of just put one foot in and one foot out and magically get rich. Hopefully this room is a little bit more, understands where that is. I'm a huge copyleft fan. People I've been hearing that one be referred to as non-commercial, which is really weird because if you go to a Linux Foundation event, they seem to be doing okay financially, so I don't know what that's about. But the main thing when you pick a license is it has to match what you're gonna do. So if you pick a license and that license allows, say, Amazon to use all your stuff, then later you can't be mad because your business model didn't account for Amazon using all your stuff, for instance, right? Another thing that good projects do is they plan for success. It's not a bad thing if a lot of people come to this project and want to use the software. So, it's being sort of prepared for growth and prepared for people to be interested and excited about what you're doing. And that means you're good at handing stuff off. So planning for success doesn't mean like one person is in charge of all the things and everything must be routed through them. Like a project that expects to succeed, the person who started it or the people who are in charge at the beginning expect to be constantly delegating things and constantly handing off tasks. Another thing that we like to see is transparency. So if you think you're getting a brown donut and you get a green donut, you're going to be, well, a couple of you might be excited. I'm kind of interested in a green donut, but most people they come to things and they want it to be like it looks. So like a bait and switch where it's like, oh, we're a super transparent community, we make decisions together, except like sometimes we make them when no one's looking and then just change stuff. Not a good look. So good projects really embrace the transparency for real. Succession is another thing. When folks have gone and moved on, like everyone's like, cool, good luck with grad school, or I'm so excited you're having kids, like that's awesome, you won an island and some weird lottery, like awesome. Not like, oh, well, thanks for leaving us. That's like, so good projects are excited when people like move on and they've planned for that, they've documented things so that it's not super painful when one person leaves. And projects that are successful are also organized, but not like over-organized, like not micro-organized, just organized enough. And you can do this in a number of different ways. Like, if you find yourself having more and more meetings, you can kind of look like, did some of our new meetings like make some of our old meetings no longer necessary? So we can like, as much as we can add, you can also pare back and go both directions. And there's not like a huge like, no, the Tuesday meeting like has to happen forever. And those meetings are great. Like they have agendas, people try to stay on topic. And when new ideas come up, you can discuss like, do you want to pilot a new idea? Like, let's try that for 3 months and see if it works. Or say like, that one I think we're going to have to table because it's pretty expensive, or it would require a radical shift, or it would require us to have like 10 more people than we currently have in the project. So we'll have to put that one aside. And, always keeping in mind the main goal of the project, which is not to get people's like wild over-caffeinated ideas into production, but to keep kind of moving towards the goal that you all understand you're working there for. Which means you have set scope. And if you're like, we're making an operating system, that's great. But like, how are we also maybe kind of creating an app for flower delivery on Bitcoin? I don't know how we drifted away over there. I found out someone is actually already doing that. I thought it was a joke that someone was going to do flower delivery on Bitcoin, but someone is doing it. So if you're going to take that idea, you'll have to fight with the person who already has Bitcoin flower delivery, weirdly. Goals versus tactics. So if your goal is to create an operating system that people can use all over the world, and then you have specific tactics, like activities that you do to get there, sometimes the tactics are only useful for a little while, and people are reluctant to switch. So understanding the difference between like what's a goal and what's an activity that we do to reach that goal. So you might think of the way that like the larger free software movement is constructed. Like if the goal is user freedom, and then the entire way that people interact with technology has all gone to the cloud, but we're still talking about only operating systems, then we may have to change some of the activities or add different activities or go to where people are at to have a different conversation. Because the goal is still user freedom. It's not to put Amazon out of business just because we don't like them. I mean, we can not like them, or we could set up a different project where that's the goal. But if the goal is user freedom, then doing stuff just because it's fun, even though it no longer meets the goal, isn't as good of an idea as it feels like at the time, which kind of brings us to the bad stuff. So some of the, and this is bad behaviors. I don't mean to say that people are evil for having bad meetings. Well, I mean, if I'm not invited, then they're not evil. But that stuff is like behaviors that are, maybe they're like so bad they're good. Like they feel kind of fun. So this is, I found this on Flickr. It's called a meth donut. I looked up, weirdly, this made me wonder what meth looks like. It's not actually teal. It's clear. But anyway, so the meth donut may be so bad it's good, right? So like some of the behaviors that projects are doing, it's fun, but it's maybe not as sustainable for a free software project that you want to see go on for a long time. So one thing that you see is like expecting that things will never change. Like projects that are set up like on very precarious things that are very like specific to like the place that the project started and can never, would never scale. Entropy happens. Things are going to change. You're going to have to move stuff, deal with different things that are happening in the outside world. Even if you are able to keep your internal thing the same, like the external stuff is going to keep changing. So projects that are like, nothing can change, tend to not be very sustainable. Relying on everyone being friends forever, which is really, it would be nice. Like I like the idea that everyone would be friends forever, but if your project depends on that, it's gonna be tricky, especially if you end up with money. Money is one of those things that it can change everything. Like the way that, like the interest that people have in the project when there's no money coming in versus money coming in, all of a sudden it just kind of like shifts in this different way. Because now you're tied into people's livelihoods. You're tied into them putting food on the table for their kids. You're tied into like who gets healthcare and who doesn't, and how come you get to get paid for this and I don't. And so, if you have a good expectation of what happens when you get there, then you're like kind of proofed against that a little bit. But if you kind of just like, oh crap, we have money, you should be like, yes, we have money, as opposed to like, oh man, this is gonna mess everything up. So that's a kind of a red flag. Letting one person run like everything, especially if they're the loudest person in the room. So it's really hard to build consensus when only one person is talking. And so a lot of times maybe you're like, oh, well, that person's talking, so the whole room must agree with them. That's rarely the case. It just means the rest of the room is not as willing to interrupt and be loud. Projects that are not setting themselves up for success also have no big picture conversations. They're like, oh, we set ourselves this like breakneck pace for release of software, so our hair is on fire. We don't have any time to talk about what we're gonna be doing in a year, let alone 2 years, because we already have another release due next Friday. Like, so if you set yourself a pace that never makes time to kind of like reflect on where we're at and how we're meeting our goals, then you're not going to be able to meet your big picture goals because no one has talked about it. And this is a bad way to go, because then you kind of just keep going with like only a little bit of remembrance of like what happened last month or how the last release went. And then you find yourself like way down here and it's like, oh, I thought we were going over here. Whoops, oh, we never talked about it. Projects that are that have some problems are projects that are like allergic to organization. And I've seen this with like a number of different projects where they're like, oh, whatever, we just like do it however, we don't like to be too formal, or like have meeting agendas because that feels like the man is kind of bringing us down, or it's like, it's cool, like you can have like a productive meeting and everyone can still, show up with like no shoes and blue hair, and it's cool. Like, I think like we don't have to like cede good meetings to only people that wear suits and have corporate jobs. Like, we can steal that and have it here also. Because those kinds of like, it's when no one knows what's happening and there's no organization, it gets really like, it kind of breaks down. So again, you end up with this thing where the loudest person gets to like direct what is happening without any buy-in from anyone else. And eventually people don't stick around if they feel like they just showed up, got yelled at by whoever is in charge because they talk the most. Like, the other people at that meeting will quietly just not return. So this is not like a good way to build a sustainable project. Another thing is where projects are like allergic to talking about money. And this one is, it's tricky because like if you have money and you don't want to talk about it, then you don't have any agreement about what you're going to do with it. And then it creates this weird, there's a couple people who are quietly like, why aren't we talking about it? That's super weird. And other people who are like, oh, one day we're going to talk about it and I know exactly what we're going to do with it. But it's not the same thing that everybody else thinks. So this gets really tricky because then when you finally do have it, like the earlier the better. If you wait for a really long time to have a conversation about money, then you will find that everyone at the table had their own idea about what was going to happen with the money, and they're not going to agree. And this can be really divisive, again, because it's tied to like having a roof over your head and putting food on your table. Not willing to kill your darlings means like something that's like super fun, but it doesn't necessarily meet your goals anymore. So like if you're doing a meetup group and it was really fun, like, let's just meet at Steve's house because it's free and Steve's house is cool. And then like all of a sudden your meetup's like 200 people. And it's like, we can't keep meeting at Steve's house, even as cool as Steve is and his house. Like even if he cleans out the garage and we meet in the garage, you can't like just keep doing stuff because it was like the fun thing. You have to go ahead and accept that you've grown and that this particular thing that worked really early is no longer workable. Aside from that, like stuff like meeting at people's individual houses isn't always super great for bringing in new people. Like if you came to me and said like, hey Deb, we're gonna like set up an awesome Linux desktop user group in the Boston area where I live, and we're gonna have it at someone's house. Yeah, you just go around back, the light's out, don't worry about that. And then we're gonna like hang out in this weird abandoned shed. And I would say, yeah, I can't come to that. And they're like, I didn't even tell you what day it was. It's like, I can never come to that. I'm never coming to your dark, weird shed meetup. It's not going to happen. You should have your meetups in a public place. So just, with bathrooms and toilet paper provided by people whose job it is to make sure it's there, all that stuff. It's trust me. So if you have I understand like when you're bootstrapped, sometimes you do stuff that's like a little weird. It's like, oh, okay, we're gonna like kind of do this funny thing. Eventually it's not funny anymore. It's just like, it's weird that we're all like in this shed pretending that we're enjoying this meetup. Like, don't do that. So that's a bad way. Like, so you have to be willing to change your tactics to meet your goals as they evolve. So the ugly is like when things are happening in your project and people come by for like a hot second and they're like, oh no, this would perhaps be an example of that. I'm curious, so I used this slide in Europe and they were like, do you guys really eat that in the US? What's it? It could be a veggie patty. Brazil, yes or no on the donut burger? No? Any yes? Or is it shameful? You can tell me later. I'm not going to out anyone on the donut burger, but yeah. So like ugly is when it's like, whoa, how did it even get like that? And people who are newcomers to your project or potential newcomers can see when you've gotten like a lot of bad behaviors kind of stacked up and it seems sort of intractable. They're like, oh yeah, no, I have lots of other things that I could do. So first one of those would be like, nobody knows why we're here. Like, we're like, you talk to like one person and they're like, oh yeah, we're trying to like make a new cloud that is like cut up into little pieces so everybody can have their own piece for privacy. And you're like, okay, cool, that sounds nice. And then another person, it's like, oh no, we're building a mobile phone. And you're like, oh, weird. That's, why does everyone think we're doing something different? I don't know. It's very difficult. You're standing over here and you're like, yeah, no. I can't figure out what you're doing, so I'm not going to try and jump in and get involved. Another one that would be kind of like, is no shared values, where you have a mix of people that are like, oh yeah, free software is really important, and another couple of folks that are like, open core, whatever. You can't have that in the same project, because you can't make any big picture decisions or move forward on anything if you don't have any agreement about like what the point of building what you're building is. This one is even more, it's like a little sneakier, like no shared expectations. Like people don't know why this activity is happening. They don't know where we intend to be in 2 years. They don't understand like what expected behavior is. So like, a code of conduct would be one of those, like, oh, we don't just like randomly slag people or do like weird images of them like on animal bodies and stuff for funsies. Like nobody wants that. You say it and it's good. If you don't say it, then nobody knows what's expected behavior. And so then you end up with like, what is going on? Why is this happening? Like I think I don't like it, and I don't know why we're doing that. So you have to have like expectations around the behavior, around the pace, around the decision making, in order to have people be able to participate meaningfully in the shared activity. This one is really interesting, like nobody knows where the money is. So like sometimes I've seen projects where the adult stuff is boring, so the people who are in charge want to only do the exciting stuff. So they give can someone set up a bank account? The person who showed up to one meeting, they're like, yeah, you do it. They didn't come back. They might have our money, we don't know. Does anyone have his IRC nick? Because we gave him a check to cash. Like, this is not good. Like, you can't give important adult stuff to people that are not invested and involved in the project. So, that's no good. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just thinking about like how bad that is. And it can be also too like the server, like can you talk to an ISP and like get this set up there? Like all of those like things that involve any kind of paperwork that aren't important until they are. Like another one is like where somebody names the project and then the person who named it or drew the logo isn't involved anymore, so you don't know where the trademark is for the name of your project and the logo that you've put on like everything. So there's like so many different things where it's like, oh, that sounded boring, but it's actually important. You can't give it to someone that's not invested in your project. So another one is letting a missing stair be your benevolent dictator for life. A missing stair is someone who is in the project that like in a public forum, everyone pretends doesn't exist and isn't a problem, but in private, someone says like, oh yeah, just try to never find yourself alone in a room with that person. So that's like really, really weird. Like, I don't care how much code someone's written. If other people in the project have to warn new people to not be in a room with them, then you have a bad situation. It really kind of makes potential newcomers wonder, like, why are you here with someone that you have to warn newcomers about? And it might not be just like be alone, or it might just be like, oh, make sure you never talk about like these 14 topics because you'll get yelled at. Some of us have a little card we keep in our pocket to remind us of the 14 bad topics, and or there's a page to the FAQ, the 14 bad topics that you can't discuss with the leader of the project without getting yelled at. You can get yelled at if you want to, but these are weird, not good, not sustainable behaviors to continue to support in projects, and it makes it hard for you to bring new people in, which makes it hard for your project to grow. So. Another one that makes people kind of walk away is where like decision making is super mysterious. Like nobody really knows. Like we have a weekly meeting in IRC, and then somewhere in between those meetings, stuff changes and nobody knows why. Like you were doing your thing, okay, and then it changed based on we're not sure who. Or The other one is like, you're going along with one particular strategy for how decision-making gets made, and then you can tell that somebody who's kind of higher up in the project doesn't like the way this decision is coming out. So then they're like, whoop, I'm going to change the way decision-making gets made. Like, now you need to have twice as many pull requests to vote on stuff. And people are not generally, I know I'm saying this coming from the US, but like people are generally not that stupid. Like if you change the decision-making process in the middle of a decision that's being made to suit one person's personal agenda, people will notice, and then they realize that the whole meeting, like the meeting that they've been attending is just a joke. It's like for show. And that doesn't feel very good to be like, cool, so I got on, we did like a long, hour-long IRC meeting with like, or a conference call with the like, hello, and that was a whole waste of time because that's not where we're really gonna make the decision. So, so that's another like thing that people come to like, oh, why do people come to one meeting and go away? And I've had people ask me this, they're like talking about building community, and they're like, why do people leave? And it's not one answer, but one of them could be this, is that they came in and they found out like, oh, we regularly just like have pretend meetings about decision making. So those are like some of the things that we see that are not good. So what can help you avoid some of that stuff? And I want to just say, like, if you're involved in a good project, like, awesome. I think many of you in this room probably are. So now you know like some ideas or some strategies or some behaviors and strategies that you might want to be like, oh, maybe we won't do that. If you're involved with a project that has a few problems, you can weigh your investment and decide like, do I want to take on fixing some of these minor problems to make my project kind of more good more of the time? So awesome. You're not obligated, and you're definitely not obligated to do it for free, but I'm sure like the wider free software community appreciates your work if you do. If the project that you have found yourself or encountered is like all bad, you might want to just find something else. Unfortunately, there are a lot of those projects out there, and I've talked to different people about like, hey, free software, you do something with that? I'm like, yeah. And I had lunch with this woman who does more traditional nonprofit work, and she's like, yeah, so you're like you work in free software? I'm like, mm-hmm. And she's like, or is it open source? I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, she didn't know anything. Like, we had been talking. She'd never heard of, like, LibreOffice. She hadn't heard of, like, any free operating systems. But she's like, but you guys argue about that, right? And I was like, oh, well, yeah. And she's like, I heard there's, like, a lot of arguments over there. It's like, you don't even know what we're doing over here yet. So unfortunately, the good, the bad, the ugly gets painted with one brush from the outside. So if we let like the kind of crummy projects be our first impression, then it becomes harder for like the good and medium projects to bring people into. So a lot of folks that have encountered like one free software project and they're like, nope, and written off the whole thing. So appreciate any work you do want to do on this, but you're also not obligated. Your own mental health and self-care and well-being comes first. So don't feel like you have to, I don't know, forcibly remove people or something, if that's not something you're up for. So some of the things you can do if you find yourself in that middle place where it feels like you could do some good without like ending up a crying puddle of sadness, then, strategic planning. This is when you have a meeting, like, say, once a year, and talk about what you want to be doing in the next 2, 3, 5 years. It sounds pretty simple, but lots of projects don't do it. They have a monthly meeting, or they have a weekly meeting, or a bi-weekly meeting, and they talk about what they're going to do in the next month, week, or 2 weeks. But they don't ever sit down and have, like, what will we do in a year? Where will we be in 5 years? And this, like, I know we're kind of doing the meta meeting of that, but this is good for individual projects too. It's to say like, where is this specific individual code base, this tool, this library, this set of things going to be in a year? Another thing you can do is find a partner. So if you have a small project, I did mention I work at the Conservancy. We offer a fiscal home for a ton of projects, and we help them with governance. I try and sit in and push strategic planning and help folks get to figure out like how they want to do that. But we have a lot of projects, and we're not the only one. There are a ton of other like projects that you could look at. Actually, when we first started doing, when Bradley Kuhn first started doing Conservancy, he thought maybe we would be the fiscal home for all the free software projects. But there's actually way too many projects for that. So I think that in the next few years, we're gonna keep seeing more and more like domain-specific fiscal sponsors. So it doesn't have to be us, and depending on what area or what zone you're in, there might be a domain-specific one that would be really helpful. Find some buddies, like if you, like, if you're about to start a project or you have a new project and you know someone who's got a project that looks like the kind of project you want, like ask them to come have lunch with you or get a coffee with you and say, how did you get your project to that space? Especially if it's like in a close specific space or geographically specific space that's similar. Like having someone you can talk with about like, hey, like mentor me on running a free software project so that I can do as good of a job as you're doing with yours. Most people, if you say like, I basically want to be you when I grow up, are pretty excited to talk to you. Even if you don't buy them a fancy lunch. Don't be afraid to outsource stuff too. Like sometimes projects have a need that is like, maybe you don't need a whole fiscal sponsor, but you need someone to like do a little accounting or do some web design so the website looks nice. Sitting in a room with like, a dozen volunteers and staring people down until someone takes on the thing they don't want to take on, not as good as just paying someone to do the thing that nobody wants to do. So outsourcing the things that nobody who's currently at the table wants to do, great idea. Finally, it's always donut time. Like, it's always time to take a look at how your processes are working, how they could be better, and how you could be like more efficient at reaching your goals in the future. A couple of other resources for you as you look at this. OpenSource.com has a lot of leadership and management. Some of them are very businessy, but a lot of them are how to run I'll stop fidgeting. I'll try. But a lot of them are how to manage the combination of volunteers and paid folks. These are 2 talks that you may find useful as well, like one specifically on succession planning and one on like making decisions with people who have a lot of different ideas. And then I have picture credits, and I would be happy to take a couple of questions from you. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there questions? There's a standing mic over there. Mm-hmm.
Everyone's project is solidly in the good pile.
Yeah, there's a good project. I just had to relive a couple of nightmares through this talk, but I laughed. It was... Yeah, there's a question.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you have any particular ideas that Debian could use money for?
Oh, like what could Debian use money for? Like you have money and you don't know what to do with it?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, that is a great problem to have. Yeah, it depends. Like, the first thing to do would be to sit and figure out like what you would like to get done that isn't getting done. And because money is a great way to get people that don't want to volunteer to do things. Like, that's how money works. So, like, there might be, there might be things people don't want to do for free. I've heard that things like writing budgets or doing paperwork are things that people don't like doing for free. There's also things where you may not have that specific expertise within the community yet. Like a lot of our projects spend money on like branding or web design in order to kind of get, like, sometimes it's really hard to see like your own website and your project's website in the same way that a newcomer would. So if you hire someone you don't know, that's also a great place to spend money, because they're going to do it because you're giving them money. So does that help?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sort of. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I guess on that, on our day trip yesterday, we were talking with the DPL. I'm from South Africa, and it's really hard for us to see that there's like mini DebConfs happening in Germany, and we can't fly out for the weekend. And so we talked about how do you keep community globally when your money's enough, to pay for some people's flights, but it's not really enough to keep that global sense of community going. And I think DebConf or Debian is at that point where we are really having global impact, but it's hard to keep that feeling of family going outside the strong core centers.
Oh, that's a great question, and one that the Python community has also looked at. And so, the Python community also has a lot of meetups and small groups around the world that participate in their community, and folks that don't necessarily always come to the large international thing. And they, for smaller groups that are starting up and don't know who to talk to get like food or a little money for a venue, like like $200 a month for a venue and $200 for food or something. So they will do that for their individual meetups. And that's a good way to stretch a smaller amount of money for global impact and free up local organizers, so that it's like, okay, so all you have to do is focus on people and then content, and you don't have to worry about trying to meet a bunch of companies that want to sponsor your individual meetup when, to be honest, it's only like 10 people so far. Later, like bigger meetups, like the Boston Python meetup is like 150, 200 people per meetup. So they have companies, like they have a roster of companies set out that want to fund their meetup. But when you're smaller and starting out, that's really hard. So that's a good place for money to go to build a global community.
And I think from a cultural point of view, it's the big dogs seem to hang out in certain places. So how do you get more of those, the spirits crossing the continents rather than just the money?
Oh, interesting. Like, I mean, we've even seen that here where people are participating in sessions via Jitsi. So if you, and this can be helpful when you're starting a small group, like having people participate remotely and like expert, like so figuring out what your group wants to hear about and then getting someone who's an expert somewhere else in the world to participate remotely can be really great. Yeah, is that what you mean by the spirit? Like, yeah, but without flying so many people, so many places. Which
We're talking about virtual machines and things.
Yeah, well, and sometimes some of the meetups when they start, like I've seen them watch a talk from a conference that no one there was able to attend and then discuss it after, which is a really low kind of, it's not expensive to sit and watch a talk video from a conference about a topic that the group is interested in. So you don't even have to get that person like scheduled up. You can just be like, hey, I saw this great talk, I want to share it with the meetup. So that's like, so a watching party or something like that is another good way.
Great idea. Are there more questions? Okay, well, that was fascinating. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Very
I'll be here all
entertaining.
week. Thanks.